Hello, everybody. Merry Christmas. My name is Mason, and welcome back to Checkpoint Station. Here with another brick and build video for you today, continuing on with our Christmas theme. So, in that, I hope you are having a wonderful Christmas, wonderful time with family and friends, and hope and joy in the season. Today, as you may be able to tell in the video or the video title, I want to look at or reflect on essentially God's plan. The Christmas, it's a chaotic time, even in the good things, but all the planning, uh, the presents, the church events, the family events, and all these different things, it adds up. But there's a lot of joy and hope, but there's also can be a lot of turmoil, maybe missing loved ones, or just the cares of this world preventing us from being able to kind of enjoy the season. And so what I want to reflect on, what I want to encourage you and even myself as I reflect on this is that we can still trust God. That God in all of this still has a plan. There's a couple verses on this. Isaiah 14:24, as I've planned, or the Lord of hosts has sworn, as I've planned, so shall it be. And as I have purposed, so shall it stand. Proverbs 19:21 says, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. So in all the craziness, both the good and the bad, it is the Lord's plan that's in control. And you can study and think about God's plan throughout much of Scripture and understand that in our life. But of course, in the Christmas time, I want to look at that in the context of the Christmas season. And I'll reference and talk about some of like specific kind of Christmas ideas or the Advent ideas that we see in the Gospels. But where I want to spend a few minutes is actually in Galatians chapter 4. Really just a couple verses I want to kind of hone in on and reflect on. I'll read the first 5 verses, but mostly focusing on the second couple verses. Again, this isn't a super deep dive or anything crazy. There are some other resources if you really want to truly unpack every detail about Galatians, but I want to reflect on the phrase, and I'm going to, kind of foreshadow it a little bit, where Paul talks about the fullness of time. So let me read. I'm in the New King James Version, chapter 4, in the first 5 verses. Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, does not differ at all from a slave, though he is master of all, but is under guardians and stewards until the time appointed by the Father. Even so, we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. But when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. And I like that phrase and the way I mentioned it in the idea of God's plan. In verse 4, he says, but when the fullness of the time had come. The translation sometimes feels a little bit not directly as clear as we might like it, but this isn't God all deciding, oh, it's been so long. Oh, I forgot. I should have sent Jesus a couple hundred years ago, or maybe I'm not sure, or anything like that. But it really gives the idea of something being completed, something being established. I was listening to Alistair Begg on this passage as well, and he talked about the idea of a bathtub kind of being filled, in that when it's filled, it's completed. That's the fullness of time. And also an aside, I think he helps cover a little bit more depth into this passage. I'll leave a link to one of his sermons in this video, just some things that I won't really touch on, and some more depth. Again, that's just a little bit of a side, but that's really what it means with the time. The fullness of the time had come, as in what it really boils down to is Christ coming. Christ being born about 2,000 years ago was not an accident, not uncertain, but the fullness of time and the fullness of plan. Jesus came exactly at the right time as part of God's plan. And as we read here in this passage, Christ was born as God's son. As we talked about in the previous video, he was born as Emmanuel, God with us. And it also says that he was born of a woman, born under the law. In other words, he was a man. This was the plan, fully God and fully man. And he was one under the law, just as we were, as the Jews were. But even in this passage, we get a lovely amount of hope. And we see Christ's purpose. So God's plan has come to fruition. But what is God's plan? Verse 5, to redeem those who are under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. And so there's two things there. It's both redeeming those who are under the law and the adoption. Redeeming, in this case, is really kind of the idea of that Jesus came to save us from the bondage and weight of sin. He removed that pressure, that mirror of the law from us. And now, as an aside, again, this is not a deep reflection, is not to say that Jesus saved us from ever having to be moral or wanting to do right, but he saved us from the accusation and the slavery of the sin that we are in. Not only did he take us just simply out of our sin, but we received the adoption as sons of God. And this is something brought on only by Christ, something that no matter how hard we struggle and do crazy things this Christmas season or any time of the year, we cannot bring the adoption ourselves. And the adoption is not simply that God will take care of us, he'll provide our minimal needs, like a pet or an employee. But the adoption is that he's given us the full rights of being born into the family. So because of this fullness of time, because of God's plan, again, as Isaiah said, as I have planned, so shall it be. And as I have purposed, so shall it stand. The fullness of time, I've just been reflecting on that phrase recently, in awe of God's plan. That he has set everything in motion, down to the minute, down to the second, so that he can redeem me and that he can adopt me by no doing of my own, but by his own love and mercy. So the idea here is that God is in control. And among the timing of Christ, of his coming, of his advent, of his birth, we see also how God was in control. If you read the Christmas story, especially between Luke and Matthew, and there's probably even more examples than what I have, but I just want to reflect on a couple more of those things, I guess, so to speak, that God has done as part of his plan. We see in Luke 2:1 the most well-known Christmas story, that a decree went out for a census. Now, I like history. I don't know every single detail of this census, but if it's anything like our modern censuses, yeah, whatever works. Back then when you had to travel quite far and things like that, this wasn't just fill out a form online. So there was definitely a window of time, but Mary and Joseph didn't live in Bethlehem. But yet we read in Malachi that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. So God moved what was at the time probably the biggest government, biggest empire in the world, for these two little people in Israel to come to Bethlehem so they could be registered in the census. And that was to fulfill God's purpose, God's prophecy of where the Christ will be born. God is in control of governments. He is the head of governments. He uses them as he pleases for his will and his plans. In Matthew chapter 2, we see the star appearing for Christ, and is what the wise men follow. We see here that God controls the heavens. Shortly after Christ's birth, when Mary and Joseph bring him to the temple in Luke chapter 2, we see a man named Simeon. Simeon was promised to live to see the Christ. Now, it's not clear at all how old specifically Simeon was. There's nothing explicitly said in the passage. And so I won't, die on any hill of how old he is, but given his language, given the promise that he'll live to see the Christ, it seems likely that he was at least older. And what that means, I don't know. But the point in that is that God's promise to him that he'll see the Christ was that God controls life. God said to him, in essence, paraphrase, that you will live as long as I need you to live, or as long as I choose for you to live, to see the Christ, to see Jesus. So if it was 500 years later, God would have sustained him. God controls life. Thinking back again, ultimately to the direct birth of Christ in the angels that heralded the message to the shepherd, that told them about the babe in swaddling clothes. I think of the popular Christmas carol, Hark the Herald Angels Sing. And just reading the first verse of that song, Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled. Joyful all ye nations rise, join the triumph of the skies. With the angelic host proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. Now, I really enjoy that song, and I think it's a good reminder of what happened. But again, in this context, thinking of the arrival of a king, of a Messiah, of a warrior, whatever, where that heralding might happen, that's usually planned, that's intentional. And I think it's just another element and a reminder of God is saying, this is my plan. He announced it with a star from the heavens to his angels, to everything. God said, the fullness of time has come. God is in control. And so my encouragement to you in the busyness of Christmas, the busyness of getting ready for the new year, and the hustle and bustle is to rest in Christ this Christmas. Christ was born as hope for us, as our Redeemer, and who provides us adoption to God. Christ still lives. God is still in control. We can trust in him. Remember that Christ wasn't born as an accident, but born in the fullness of time. And what a wonderful thing that is, and something that I am so thankful for. I thank you for joining me today on this reflection of God's plan, reflection of the fullness of time and the hope that Christ brings. I hope you all have a wonderful Merry Christmas. Remember to rest in him, but to enjoy the time with the family in the joy that Christ has provided. This was a little bit shorter of an episode of a video, so the Lego building in the background might have been sped back a little bit up. I'm still getting the hang of the format. Feel free to leave suggestions, comments, and stuff below. I'd love to know what you think. I'd love to improve this format. I'm sure I'll be back probably sometime in January, maybe with another video, but I'll probably be taking a break as well for the holidays. So I hope you all have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. God bless.